I used to work in a big hospital and my job was to take food orders from patients. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. One day, though, something really spooky happened that I can't forget. I walked into a patient's room and immediately a horrible smell hit me. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before, and it made my skin crawl. The room was dimly lit, and the curtains were drawn. In the corner, an old lady with wild white hair stood facing the window. She didn't seem to notice me at first. I tried to be polite and told her it was time for dinner. I asked her what she'd like to eat, but she didn't respond. She just giggled to herself and mumbled incoherently. I repeated myself, thinking maybe she hadn't heard me, but she continued to mutter strange words to herself. It sent shivers down my spine, and I felt a chill in the air. Feeling uneasy, I decided to give her some time to think, and said I'd be back. I moved on to the next room to take another patient's order, hoping to shake off the weird encounter. About 15 minutes later, I returned to the old lady's room, ready to take her order. But when I entered, I couldn't believe what I saw. She was now tucked under her blanket, covering her entire body, including her face. It seemed like she was crying softly, saying she wanted to go home. I became concerned that she might be having trouble breathing under the blanket, so I gently tried to pull it away from her head. But something was terribly wrong. She clung to the blanket so tightly that I couldn't move it an inch. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't help her, and she seemed to be in distress. I quickly left the room and rushed to find a nurse. I explained what had happened and pointed to the room. The nurse followed me back, but when we entered, the room was empty. There was no sign of the old lady. We searched everywhere, but she had vanished without a trace. The nurse then told me something that sent chills down my spine. She said the old lady had passed away the day before. Apparently, she used to play games under the blanket with her grandkids, and it was something she loved to do. The nurse assured me that what I experienced was just the old lady's playful spirit, still lingering in the hospital. I was so freaked out that I couldn't bear to stay at work any longer that day. I left in a hurry, unable to shake the eerie feeling that had settled over me. That encounter with the ghostly old lady would haunt my dreams for many nights to come. A reminder that sometimes the past lingers in the most unexpected and unsettling ways. Six years ago, in the middle of June, my friends and I decided to go camping in Minnesota. There were 6 of us, and we were excited to spend some quality time in the great outdoors. We arrived at our campsite around 2 p.m., and everything seemed just perfect. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the forest around us felt peaceful. As the day turned into night, we decided to gather around the campfire and share some spooky stories. It was around 8 p.m. when John, one of our friends, began to tell a ghost story. He shared a creepy tale about his uncle's strange experience in Thailand when he was young. Little did we know that this innocent storytelling would lead to something truly terrifying. As John finished his story, an eerie feeling started to creep over me. It was as if something was watching us from the dark woods nearby. At first I tried to dismiss it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. We continued listening to stories, and then our friend Ling, who sometimes says things without thinking, made a joke that he's been lonely and single for too long. He shouted into the dark woods that he wanted a ghost girlfriend and was willing to sleep with one tonight. Everyone told him to stop yelling like that at night. Later that night, I couldn't sleep and heard leaves crunching. I thought it might be a deer or something, but then I heard a woman's voice being called from the woods. A woman's voice kept repeating Leng's name and saying that it was time to go. It called out my friend's name for almost a minute. I was terrified and tried to wake up my girlfriend, but she didn't respond. I opened my eyes slightly and saw a shadow by our tent. It was making raspy breathing sounds and kept saying Leng's name. This terrified me even more because my girlfriend was the only woman camping with us that night. I was so scared that I couldn't move. The shadow figure slowly unzipped the tent. I gathered all my courage and screamed, waking everyone up. My other friends in the tent said they had also heard the voice, but were too scared to make a sound. When we looked at Leng, he was shaking and couldn't speak. We all knew he had heard it too. We decided to leave immediately, packing up our campsite at midnight. As we were about to go, we heard the voice again. My name is Lee, and I used to work in a big, dark warehouse that was always filled with the humming of machinery and the echo of voices. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills. The scariest thing about it, though, wasn't the long hours or the heavy lifting. It was the story of my co-worker, Sarah. Sarah was a tough cookie, never afraid to stand up to our supervisor, Mr. Thompson. One day, they had a heated argument right in the middle of the warehouse. Sarah was fuming, and it seemed like she had reached her breaking point. After that day, she stopped showing up to work, and we all assumed she had quit. But then something strange happened. One day, I was walking past the dry room, a place no one usually ventures into. Through the glass window, I saw Sarah working inside. It was odd, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she had been rehired and assigned to the dry room. As time passed, people started seeing Sarah around the warehouse even though she had officially quit. She would walk the aisles, pushing an empty cart and mumbling to herself. Her presence sent shivers down our spines, and we couldn't explain it. Things took a darker turn when a foul smell started emanating from the dry room. It was unbearable, and no amount of air freshener could mask it. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check the room, the very place where Sarah had been spotted. We opened the door to the dry room, and there, in a small dark corner, hidden behind a massive cardboard box, we found her. Sarah's lifeless body dangled from a makeshift noose. The box had concealed her for weeks, and none of us had noticed. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that we had been working alongside her ghost. Her haunting presence had grown stronger, and it seemed she wanted us to discover the gruesome truth. From that day on, the warehouse became a place of dread. The once bustling workspace turned into an eerie, desolate wasteland. Sarah's ghost continued to torment us, appearing at odd hours, whispering unsettling words in the darkness and causing tools to move on their own. We couldn't take it anymore, and some of us quit, unable to bear the haunting any longer. The fear and paranoia spread like wildfire, and no one felt safe in that warehouse. In the end, we had to leave the place, abandoning the warehouse to the darkness that had consumed it. Sarah's twisted presence remained, a haunting reminder of the horrifying secret hidden behind the dry room's closed doors, forever etched in our memories as a chilling tale of the warehouse that was never the same again. Back in the 90s, growing up in Fresno was tough. I ended up joining a gang, the Bloods, to feel like I belonged somewhere. Life was different back then, and the choices I made weren't the best. One night, things took a terrifying turn. It was a typical evening, and a few of us gang members were outside our house, just drinking and hanging out. We didn't know that danger lurked in the shadows. Suddenly, shots rang out, and the world turned into chaos. Bullets hit us, and I saw one of my buddies drop to the ground. He didn't make it. He passed away right there in front of me. It was a nightmare. I spent a whole month in the hospital, recovering from my injuries. The pain was real, but the guilt and fear were even worse. I knew I needed to change my life. About 3 months later, I decided to leave the gang life behind and find work. Late one night, I came back from work to my dark and dimly lit parking lot. Each parking stall had a faint light, and the air felt heavy with an eerie presence. As I stepped out of my car, I heard a strange, agonizing moan coming from underneath it. My heart raced, and I slowly bent down to see what was there. My blood ran cold as I saw my dead friend, the one who had been shot, lying there under my truck. His face was covered in blood, and he looked like he was in pain. Then something even more horrifying happened. He reached out his hand toward me as if asking for help. I couldn't believe my eyes. I staggered back in shock and terror, my mind unable to process what was happening. Without a second thought, I sprinted into my apartment, leaving the haunting image behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ghostly encounter with my dead friend haunted my thoughts. It was the scariest night of my life, and it made me realize that I needed to leave Fresno and the gang life behind forever. I moved away from that place, away from the darkness that had consumed my life. I quit the gang life for good, determined to make better choices and leave the horrors of my past behind me.